On February 9, 1982, at Fukuoka Airport in Fukuoka Prefecture, Japan, a McDonnell Douglas DC-861, an enhanced variant of the DC-8, was undergoing refueling in preparation for a domestic flight lasting 1.5 hours from Fukuoka International Airport to Hana International Airport. This flight, designated as JAL 350, was operated by Japan Airlines, which is recognized as one of the largest and most esteemed airlines globally. In addition to its reputation for high-quality service and passenger comfort, Japan Airlines was distinguished by its exceptional pilots, who were meticulously selected and rigorously trained. These pilots possessed not only proficiency in aircraft operation but also the ability to manage emergencies with poise, a critical factor in ensuring flight safety and upholding Japan Airlines' esteemed status in the aviation industry. The aircraft designated for this flight, the McDonnell Douglas DC-861, while not particularly old, had been in service for over 15 years, amassing a total of 36,955 flight hours. Nevertheless, it remained a trusted asset for Japan Airlines. This model was powered by Pratt & Whitney JT3D3B engines, providing it with a range of approximately 4,475 miles and accommodating between 210 to 259 passengers. Its substantial capacity and long-range capabilities rendered the DC-861 particularly suitable for transcontinental and international operations. A total of 174 individuals, comprising 166 passengers and 8 crew members, boarded the aircraft. In the cockpit, 3 relatively young pilots were present. At the controls was Captain S.I. Katagiri, aged 35, who had been with Japan Airlines since October 1, 1969. By this time, Captain Katagiri had accumulated 5,698 flight hours, including 448 hours on DC-8 aircraft. Assisting him was First Officer Yoshifumi Ishikawa, 33 years old, who also served as the flight's monitoring pilot. He had logged 3,391 flight hours, with only 186 of those on the DC-8. The flight engineer, Yoshimi Ozoki, aged 48, was the oldest and most seasoned member of the crew, boasting a total of 6,560 flight hours, 3,564 of which were on the DC-8. Before commencing today's journey, it is crucial to note the condition of Captain Katagiri. Although he had passed the health check prior to boarding, it appeared that the captain was experiencing difficulties. He struggled to concentrate during the pre-flight briefing and was seen with his head in his hands for an extended period before proceeding to the aircraft's parking area. To gain a better understanding of this pilot's background, it is important to consider his history. In November 1980, over a decade into his tenure at Japan Airlines, Katagiri requested and was granted a year-long medical leave due to health concerns, specifically a diagnosis of depression. He had been experiencing a decline in his mental well-being, often feeling as though his home was under surveillance with hidden cameras and suspecting that his phone calls were being monitored. The Tokyo police were involved in these matters repeatedly. An investigation into his residence yielded no evidence of surveillance or wiretapping, contrary to his assertions. Additionally, reports indicated that Kiri's wife had separated from him due to his peculiar behavior. Remarkably, Japan Airlines remained oblivious to these developments, while Katagiri himself concealed his illness in order to resume flying in November 1981, following his leave. Eager to return to work, Katagiri successfully passed the airline's examinations and was authorized to operate the DC-8 as captain. This detail is significant, as it is integral to the events that unfold today. At 7:30 a.m., 166 passengers were seated on the aircraft, and the flight attendants conducted final safety checks and briefings prior to takeoff. In the cockpit, the crew completed their pre-flight checks and started the engines. Everything proceeded as expected, except for First Officer Ishikawa's persistent concern that Captain Katagiri seemed unwell. "Captain, are you feeling all right?" he inquired. "Thank you, I'm fine," Katagiri replied. At that moment, they received a communication from Fukuoka Air Traffic Control. J350, this is Fukuoka. Are you ready for departure? Fukuoka J350 is ready for departure, came the response. J350, cleared for takeoff on runway 16. Have a safe flight. At 7:34 a.m., J350 received clearance for takeoff from runway 16. With the roar of the engines, the aircraft taxied onto the runway and gradually accelerated. Less than a minute later, it ascended smoothly into the sunlit sky, heading northeast toward Tokyo. During the initial moments of the flight, all passengers adhered to the crew's safety instructions as the plane climbed. Everything was progressing seamlessly in accordance with the established plan, aided by favorable weather conditions and tailwinds. The DC-8 effortlessly attained each altitude designated by air traffic control. At 7:54 a.m., merely 20 minutes post-takeoff, Captain Katagiri elevated the aircraft to its planned cruising altitude of 29,000 feet. Once the aircraft stabilized at this altitude, passengers began to unwind, while the crew diligently monitored the systems to ensure all operations were proceeding as intended. The control panel indicated that all parameters remained stable, confirming a smooth flight. The crew of JL-350 maintained their concentration, piloting the aircraft with precision. Outside, the sky was clear, suggesting a tranquil journey ahead. The flight continued without any indications of difficulty. At 8:22 a.m., 48 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft was positioned just 100 meters south of Tokyo, receiving directives from air traffic control. Captain Katagiri initiated a descent to 16,000 feet, followed by a further descent to 3,000 feet in preparation for landing. Up to this moment, everything had unfolded flawlessly. At 8:38 a.m., JL-350 commenced its approach to Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Unlike its modern and expansive counterpart today, Haneda Airport in 1980 was undergoing significant expansion and renovation, with only 2 runways operational, runway 15 left for 33 right and runway for 22. At 8:39 a.m., JL-350 received clearance for an ILS approach to runway 33 right. Approaching from the south necessitated that the captain fly over the waters of Tokyo Bay. The landing gear was deployed, followed by the flaps being set to a 50-degree angle. Minutes later, at 8:42 a.m., the DC-8 descended to an altitude of 1,000 feet, maintaining a speed of 130 knots. The destination appeared to be within reach, and for all passengers and crew, it seemed as though a routine landing was imminent. However, it was at this moment that the first indications of trouble began to surface. At 8:43 a.m. As the aircraft reached 500 feet, First Officer Yoshifumi Ishikawa informed the captain of their altitude, but received no response. The captain remained silent, deviating from Japan Airlines standard operating procedures. Assuming the captain had not heard him, the first officer repeated the call as they descended to 300 feet, yet still received no acknowledgement from the captain. 56 seconds later, the radio altimeter warning activated, and flight engineer Yoshimi Ozaki announced that they had reached the decision height of 164 feet above the water, while still maintaining a speed of 130 knots. Typically, the captain would announce either landing or go around, but once again, silence reigned. At this juncture, the first officer sensed that something was amiss. He turned to observe Captain Kadiri trembling, his forehead slick with sweat, seemingly gripped by fear. Hallucinations overwhelmed the captain's mind, leading him to believe that Japan was under Soviet occupation, divided into 2 factions, and embroiled in a brutal war. Kadiri felt compelled to act as a kamikaze pilot, intent on crashing the aircraft into the enemy, preferring death over capture. Although his hands remained on the controls, he appeared lost in his delusions, muttering incoherently, "No, not me, not me. Captain, are you okay? We need to land," First Officer Yoshifumi Ishikawa began to urge, but before he could finish, the captain abruptly disengaged the autopilot and pushed forward. The pilot pushed the yoke forward and reduced the throttle to idle, causing the aircraft's nose to pitch down sharply and lose altitude. Flight engineer Yoshimi Ozaki observed the abrupt change and exclaimed that they were losing power. However, Captain Kadiri appeared unaware of the situation, continuing his actions while repeatedly insisting that others stay away from him. He then activated the thrust reversers on engines 2 and 3, a mechanism intended to decelerate the aircraft after landing. Following this sequence of irrational decisions, the DC-8 nearly lost all thrust, rendering it a powerless glider. In a state of urgency, the flight engineer called out for help, stating that the captain had gone mad. Instinctively, the first officer pulled back on the yoke to counteract the captain's maneuvers, while Yoshimi Ozaki jumped from his seat to restrain the frantic captain. Both the first officer and the flight engineer were in shock, unable to comprehend why the captain would jeopardize the safety of himself and everyone aboard. Meanwhile, passengers in the cabin were gripped by panic as they experienced the aircraft's erratic movements and sudden changes in direction. "Oh my God, what's happening? This isn't the airport. The plane is about to crash into the water. What is going on?" The head flight attendant, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, attempted to reach the cockpit but was thwarted by a severed communication line. He promptly instructed the other flight attendants to help passengers don life jackets and provided crucial guidance for emergency evacuation. Utilizing his skills, he worked to maintain calm among the passengers, urging them to remain patient as they awaited rescue. Gradually, the passengers began to settle down, reflecting on how just moments before, everything had seemed normal. They were prepared for landing, holding their breath as the aircraft hurtled towards catastrophe. The events unfolded so rapidly that many passengers struggled to grasp the situation. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the atmosphere was grim, the captain was in tears, while the other two crew members fought valiantly to avert a disaster. Unfortunately, their attempts were in vain during those critical moments. At 8:46 a.m., the DC-8 descended into the shallow waters of Tokyo Bay, near the T River's mouth, just 500 meters from runway 33. Upon impact, the aircraft struck the water on its right side, resulting in the main wing being torn away and, more critically, the nose detaching from the fuselage, creating a rupture that began at row 12. Many passengers seated at the front sustained severe injuries, with some being ejected from the wreckage and killed instantly. However, there was a flicker of hope. Due to the first officer's desperate maneuvers, the plane landed in a shallow bay where the tide had just receded, leaving the water depth at slightly over a meter. This significantly reduced the impact force, and the tail section remained mostly intact, leading to only minor injuries and psychological distress for some passengers. At Haneda Tower, air traffic controllers were in shock. The aircraft that had just requested landing clearance was now submerged, not on runway 33 as directed. They exclaimed in disbelief, questioning what had happened to J350. In the cockpit, all three crew members had sustained injuries. The distressing moment of realization struck as he understood he had survived. The first officer, unable to suppress his fury, exclaimed, "What have you done?" Meanwhile, the captain, still in a state of shock, remained seated, tears flowing down his cheeks as he murmured, "I saved them, I saved them." In that moment, no one could comprehend Kiri's motivations or thoughts. Perhaps in his confused state, he truly believed he had acted correctly. At 8:50 a.m. For minutes after the crash, the fire department received a notification from Haneda Air Traffic Control. However, it took an additional 20 minutes for rescuers to reach the site, as many firefighters were still occupied with the aftermath of a significant fire from the previous day. Fortunately, local fishermen, having witnessed the incident, bravely used their boats to commence the initial rescue efforts. Upon arrival, a substantial amount of fuel was extracted from the aircraft to avert an explosion. It took over 3.5 hours to evacuate all passengers onto lifeboats and transport them to safety. At this juncture, one might wonder who instigated this calamity and the whereabouts of Captain Kadiri. He was among the first to escape the aircraft and board a rescue vessel. It was later revealed that he had falsely identified himself as an office worker and had allegedly discarded his uniform to evade recognition as a crew member. This act of cowardice was met with widespread condemnation in Japan, a nation renowned for its discipline and spirit of mutual assistance. The investigation into the J350 crash revealed significant findings. The tragic incident involved the loss of 24 lives among the 174 individuals aboard, with many others sustaining injuries. Japan Airlines faced considerable financial repercussions, marking this as the airline's first fatal accident of the 1980s. Initial investigations suggested favorable weather conditions and no indications of mechanical failure, prompting a focus on the flight crew. The analysis of the cockpit voice recorder revealed startling information, including the captain's distressing cries prior to the aircraft's descent, which hinted at a significant psychological issue. There had been no previous indications of discord or disputes among the crew. Captain Katagiri was later located at a temporary shelter, while the other crew members were hospitalized, which impeded the investigation's advancement. Further inquiries uncovered that the aircraft's engines had been engaged in reverse thrust before the crash. Psychological profiling during interrogations led investigators to conclude that Captain Katagiri had deliberately attempted to crash the aircraft by manipulating the engines, resulting in its rapid descent. A subsequent investigation established that the captain had suffered a mental breakdown during the flight's final stages. It was noted that Katagiri had previously taken a year off due to depression, and it appeared that his condition had deteriorated during the landing approach, contributing to his erratic conduct and speech. This was deemed the most credible explanation for his unusual behavior. However, in the trial that followed the crash, Katagiri was acquitted and absolved of all charges due to his mental state at the time of the incident. Further investigations later disclosed that Captain Kadir had been diagnosed with schizophrenia prior to the incident. Rather than facing imprisonment for his actions, he was admitted to a psychiatric facility and subsequently dismissed from Japan Airlines. An investigation conducted by the digital media company OIE revealed that the captain was discharged from the hospital and, as of 2015, resided with his wife in a two-story home near Mount Fuji in Kagawa. Japan Airlines faced significant backlash for permitting an unstable pilot to operate the aircraft and for employing unethical media strategies to sway public perception. In response to this incident, Japanese authorities established the Aviation Medical Center at Haneda Airport in 1984, aimed at implementing daily health management and regular medical evaluations for pilots, with a particular emphasis on mental health. Following the event, Japan Airlines permanently retired Flight 350. It is important to note that Captain Kadir's actions were entirely deliberate rather than accidental. Furthermore, police later disclosed that the JL Flight 350 incident was preventable and had been foreseen. The day before the crash, during a flight from Haneda to Fukuoka, Captain Katagiri displayed erratic behavior while the aircraft was on the runway awaiting takeoff clearance, demonstrating impatience to depart. Additionally, immediately after takeoff, the aircraft was scheduled to execute a right turn at 250 knots with a 25 bank angle. However, Katagiri banked the aircraft at nearly 70, surpassing the maximum allowable limit by 40. Fortunately, the first officer recognized the situation and made the necessary corrections. The aircraft, while attempting to maneuver, experienced a significant bank angle that resulted in a sideslip, causing it to lose 800 feet of altitude within a mere 15 seconds. Despite the passengers voicing their apprehensions and fears, the prevailing rigid hierarchy and conservative mindset in Japanese society at that time led co-pilot Ishikawa to hesitate in reporting the incident. It is conceivable that had the captain been granted medical leave, the unfortunate tragedy might have been averted.